Hey everybody, this is writer David Lucarelli. It's about 10:05 in Hollywood. This is the final day of the Tinseltown Losing the Light Kickstarter. You'll have to forgive me. This is me using Streamyard for the first time on my own. I've been on a lot of Streamyard live streams with Peter Samedi, but I've never been on one where I'm in charge. So I'm just figuring out the ins and outs. I was supposed to be joined by Alterna friend and my friend, Pat Jankowitz, but I believe that he is stuck waiting for a train. So he may join us, he may not, but you've got me for the time being. I have figured out how to present stuff on my screen. I have not yet figured out how to do that with audio. So anyhow, I just thought that it would be nice to log on and do a live stream where I just got a chance to talk and say everything that's left to say about Tinseltown Losing the Light, this Kickstarter. Because it's really been an amazing ride, and I am so incredibly grateful to all of our backers. We are at currently 250 backers, and our goal was 8,000. We are now at $9,714. And I'll just be honest with you. I know that one of the ways that Kickstarter works is you're supposed to build a mailing list, and then you're supposed to email that mailing list a lot when you're running a Kickstarter, your author newsletter, and hope that people don't get too sick of you bugging them to back the Kickstarter all the time. When the pandemic hit, I kind of let my newsletter atrophy quite a bit, because I had used it to let people know when I was doing an appearance. And obviously when the pandemic hit, there were no appearances, there were no cons, there were no comic book store in-stores signings, anything like that. So I wasn't really sure, to be honest. The last Kickstarter that I ran was in 2019, and it was our biggest Kickstarter to date. It was for the first Tinseltown, and we raised over $7,000. So I thought to myself, being that this is volume 2, and that we would be selling, hopefully, copies of volume 1 and volume 2 through the Kickstarter, that I might be able to raise a little more. So that's why I set the goal at 8,000. And to be honest, that worked out really, really well. I was happy just to make my goal. And now that we've gone beyond the goal, it's icing on the cake, so to speak. Actually, it's funny I use that phrase, because today I had a custom-made cake made with Tinseltown Losing the Light on the surface of the cake, the cover of the graphic novel, and I gave out free cake at Golden Apple Comics. Much thanks to Ryan there. They've been incredibly supportive of me and independent comics in general. I am so grateful that they continued to do so. Golden Apple is really the comic book store in the heart of Hollywood, and I can say that I've been going there for many years. I even put Golden Apple in the song lyrics of one of my songs with my band Dame Fortune. And over the years, I've run into everybody there, from Harlan Ellison to Gene Simmons. When they say it is the comic book shop of the stars, they're not kidding. And so much thanks to them for letting me hang out there and give away some free cake and hopefully get a few more backers as well. So for anybody that's listening to this live stream that doesn't know anything about Tinseltown, if you're completely new to this, let me just give you a little background. Tinseltown is a period crime drama graphic novel series about one of the first female police officers in Hollywood, Officer Abigail Moore. And it's been compared to LA Confidential meets Boardwalk Empire. In real life, my mother was a police officer. She proudly served the Pittsburgh Police Department for 20 years. And she is sadly no longer with us, but Tinseltown is my tribute to her. It was also inspired by some historical circumstances. So 1915, Universal Studios was kind of a proto-feminist organization in a way, because they had a female mayor, a female police chief, and female police officers. They kind of functioned as a cross between lot security guards, people there to assist and amuse the tourists, making sure that the extras weren't getting up to any hanky-panky in the hallways or the alleys between shots, stopping petty theft if there were pickpockets on the lot, that kind of thing. Actually, in doing research for Tinseltown, I found out that Universal Studios was not the only studio that had female police officers. D.W. Griffith's studio, which went by a number of names, also had them. And I found that out only when I was researching the second graphic novel, Tinseltown Losing the Light. So Tinseltown originally was published as a 5-issue limited series by Alterna Comics. If you're not familiar with Alterna Comics, I believe they are maybe the only publisher that is currently still publishing comics on newsprint like they used to be published. So they look, they smell just like comic books used to. And that also allows them to keep the price point pretty low. When Tinseltown #1 came out, it was $1.50. Now they're $1.99. I believe the next set of alternate titles to come out will start at $2.25, but still maybe half what the average comic book price is at your local comic book shop. So after the first 5 issues came out, it was very well received, and I did what I call a director's cut graphic novel edition of the first book. And that had about 5 additional pages of content, story content, that was not in the original 5-issue miniseries. And it also had a bunch of brand new pinups as well. And that was well received. So I told Peter I'd like to do a sequel series that became Tinseltown Losing the Light. And whereas the first Tinseltown series was kind of the origin story of Officer Abigail Moore, she is the daughter of a fallen police officer. She wants to be a real police officer, so she applies to the LAPD. The LAPD did have some female police officers in 1915, but not very many of them. And that came about historically because you had a bunch of teenage runaways that were female, oftentimes prostitutes and drug addicts, and they needed to do strip searches on them, and the men were not comfortable doing that. So that was one of the limited roles that some of the first female police officers were allowed to do with the LAPD. So once she's rejected by them, she goes to audition for a role as a police officer on the Utopia Studios lot, and she is accepted. And although She's kind of a pseudo police officer, a quasi police officer. It's not actually very long before she finds some very real and significant crime that she ends up being involved in stopping, and through that ends up becoming a little bit closer to being a real police officer. She also ends up injured. So there is a connective short story called Pinboy that was published it came out on a Wednesday, where Abigail and her beau, Tennessee Dan O'Leary, decide to go bowling before she's going to go back to work. And for those of you who don't know, there was a phenomenon back then, before they had automatic machines to change the bowling pins, called pinboys. And the pinboys would literally manually switch out the pins after each frame, and obviously this was very dangerous, because if somebody wasn't paying attention and they threw the ball while a pinboy was in the midst of trying to adjust the pins, they could get hit by that ball or the flying pins, and they could get hurt very badly. And this job tended to fall to African American youth. So I don't want to give away the whole story, but one of those youths is badly mistreated, and Abigail tries to stand up for him. She inadvertently gets him fired, and to try to make it up to him, she tries to get him a job at Utopia Studios. And his name is Billy, and he becomes an important character in Tinseltown Losing the Light. So, Tinseltown Losing the Light. One of the themes about Losing the Light is that of identity. Okay, who changes their name? Who creates a new identity for themselves? Well, actors coming out to Hollywood, oftentimes trying to hide their ethnicity, they do that all the time, right? Especially back then, it was assumed that the audience might not take to a movie star whose name sounded too ethnic, and so they would try to change it to something that would hide that ethnicity. Who else changes their names? Well, spies do, right? Because they assume completely other identities. And there was actually a bunch of spies going on around 1916. German spies in the United States, because although the United States wasn't involved with World War I directly yet, we were supplying supplies ostensibly to both Germany and Germany's enemies, but practically only to Germany's enemies, because the way that the blockades were set up, we were not getting any supplies to Germany. Oh, and thank you for joining us, Dark Side Philip. So the third category of people that change their names, women, when they get married. And that actually is an issue in Tinseltown Losing the Light, because Abigail has very complicated feelings about her father, having lost him when she was a little girl. So one of the things that she says to Dan when he proposes to her is, yeah, I'll marry you, but I don't want to change my last name. And let's see. So I thought that was an appropriate thing for the character, Abigail, because she is unconventional. She is a character who is trying to find her place in a world that is oftentimes indifferent or openly hostile to her very existence. And let's see, Dark Side Phillips says that my S's are popping. Okay, I apologize for that, Philip. I'm not really sure what I can do about that. I don't know when you joined us. This is really my first live stream, so it's possible that I could run some kind of effect or DS filter on my voice, but I can't really do it live. So I'll just do the best I can, and I'll try to de-emphasize. So anyhow, one of the things that inspired Tinseltown Losing the Light is I started looking at some of the earliest examples of espionage in the United States. And I found a really cool book that's called Dark Invasion by Howard Bloom. And I can't really recommend this book highly enough because I'll just read the subtitle here if you didn't see it. Germany's Secret War and the Hunt for the First Terrorist Cell in America. This is like an action adventure book, but it is all true, all real. And what it talks about is in 1915, there were a bunch of German soldiers and workers that were kind of stuck in the United States when the war broke out, and they were recruited to work as spies. They were planting pipe bombs on American ships that were sending supplies to Germany's enemies, and those ships were blowing up. It was some of the first examples of terrorism in the United States, and the United States government really tried to cover it up for as long as possible because basically the American business interests were making money hand over fist by supplying to Germany's enemies. And, you know, they knew that they would probably have to join the war, but they were trying to postpone it as long as possible. And when they couldn't postpone it anymore, obviously they did. They did join the war, but that was sort of the background that I was interested in. And I was thinking to myself, there were probably similar incidents happening in the United States on the West Coast. And I did some research. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but that's some of the basis of where Tinseltown Losing the Light comes across. So let me just take a look here. I'm going to share the screen with you guys. And let's see, Chrome tab, Tinseltown. All right, so this is the Tinseltown Kickstarter. Like I said, we're currently at $9,714 with 250 backers. And I have to update this. This actually says that we haven't hit the stretch goal yet, but obviously we have now unlocked the $9,000 stretch goal, which means that every backer will be getting an additional pinup by artist Rafael Navarro. And they'll also be getting a digital indie comics bundle. So I'll just explain what that is really quickly. I handpicked half a dozen issue number ones. And I think you'll like them. I think that they all either feature kind of noir qualities that if you like something like Tinseltown, you might appreciate that, or they feature really strong female protagonists. So anyhow, now obviously we blew past $9,000. I haven't even been able to keep up. We're now past $9,500. So let me just say, there will be an additional pinup that will be part of the Tinseltown Losing the Light book. I can't give you the name of the artist yet because I reached out to him just today and I haven't heard back from him, but he's an artist that I recently discovered from my hometown of Pittsburgh. I really, really like his work a lot. So I'm hoping that he responds, that he's interested in doing the pinup. I want to share his work with the greater world. I think that somebody who is as talented as he is deserves to be exposed to a much, much wider audience. So again, waiting to hear from him. Now, here you see this is Tinseltown Volume 1. That's a mock-up of what Volume 2 is going to look like, more or less. And for those of you that are considering backing and maybe haven't backed yet, you can download the first 20 pages of Volume 1 for free just by clicking on this. And the first 15 pages of Tinseltown Losing the Light for free there. So here you can see all the covers of Tinseltown Losing the Light. And those covers will be included as part of the Tinseltown Losing the Light Kickstarter, as well as that short story that I mentioned before, Pin Boy, that connects. And much like Volume 1, Volume 2 is also a director's cut. So it will feature 5 additional pages of story. Not to spoil anything, but basically all of those 5 pages in this instance come within the end of the story, basically within issue 5. And the reason for that is I sort of felt like we were rushing the pace a little bit of the end of the story. It's kind of a complicated story. There's a lot of spinning plates. And Peter was actually very, very generous in allowing me to expand the page count for Tinseltown issue 5. We, I think, landed at maybe 29 pages instead of the usual 23 or 24. And most publishers are not that understanding. But even in hindsight, I thought to myself, I want to just give certain parts of the story a little bit more weight. I want to expand those sequences and just pace them out a little better so it doesn't feel like we're rushing through them just to get to the next thing that has to happen. And kind of like a balloon, when you expand the story in one part, you find, well, now I have to expand it in this other part for it to feel like the overall pacing is consistent. I kind of liken it to the director's cut of The Outsiders. I don't know if any of you have seen the original Outsiders or Francis Ford Coppola's expanded director's cut. They're not really that different overall. It's not like night and day. They're telling the same story, but they do emphasize slightly different aspects and expand some scenes in a very minor way. So it's not like I'm rewriting the story. I'm just telling it in a way that I think is coming across a little bit more like I intended it. All of the art in Tinseltown is by artist Henry Ponciano. He is a Filipino artist, and we have been working together now for about 10 years. Tinseltown is actually the second comic that we worked on. The first, I'll just skip down here real quick. The first comic that we did, there's a picture of Henry. So the first book that we did was this one, The Children's Vampire Hunting Brigade. And that is a 3-volume set. There's Volume 1, Guardians of the Southern Necropolis. Volume 2, Age of the Wicked. Volume 3, All Souls Day. And this little thing you see over here on the right is called Dossier. That contains some additional unreleased material and covers that that make it the complete children's vampire hunting brigade. So, like I said, it's a coming-of-age gothic adventure punk rock Buffy set in Scotland. The reason why it is set in Scotland is because it was inspired by something called the Gorbals vampire incident. In real life, 1950 Scotland, hundreds of school kids went looking for a vampire in the Southern Necropolis Cemetery. It happened over several nights, and it was considered mass hysteria. They blamed it on comics, actually. In our book, they find what they're looking for, they form the brigade, and then a half century later, Gavin and Doug, a couple of juvenile delinquents, are drinking in that graveyard on the night that the vampires come back. And they unwittingly end up becoming the two newest members of the brigade. So ostensibly, this book is a lot different than Tinseltown. For one thing, it is in black and white, or black, white, and gray, I should say. But actually, much like I said with Tinseltown, the commonality, aside from that both I and Henry are working on it, is that you have characters that are trying to find their place in an often indifferent and frequently hostile world. So I don't know about you. I've always kind of liked to follow creators and creative teams, and I've always found if I enjoy one of their books, chances are I'm going to like the other books that they do. And that's certainly been true for me and some of my favorites like Jack Kirby, Dave Stevens, Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, much of Frank Miller's work. So hopefully you may find that you like The Brigade. If you enjoy Tinseltown, the full complete series is offered as part of the Kickstarter. All right, so we're going to go back up to here again. And one of the cool things that Losing the Light, the director's cut, is going to have is an introduction by Tony Isabella. So I grew up, before there was the internet, reading the weekly journal of the comic book industry, which was called the Comic Buyer's Guide. And Tony had a weekly column in it that I looked forward to every week, as did people like Peter David and others. And I heard through the grapevine that Tony was a fan of Tinseltown. So I reached out to him and I said, would you be interested in writing the introduction? And he got back to me. He said he would be honored. And I was incredibly flattered that he was going to take that on. And he's sent me part of the introduction. I can't wait to get the rest of it. But I'm very, very happy with the part that he's sent me so far. I'm also going to include a preface in which I kind of go into a little bit more detail about the circumstances that led to my mother becoming a police officer. And, it had to do with my parents getting a divorce and my mother suddenly needing to, in her late 30s, find an entirely new career so that we would be able to continue living a middle-class lifestyle. And she grew up reading Nancy Drew mystery books. And she thought, I could probably do that. And so she went and tried out to be a police officer. She had some crazy adventures. I was worried about her much of the time. She had a meat cleaver thrown at her. Luckily, it missed. She and her partner managed to apprehend a murderer, and they were supposed to get an award for that, except that their captain neglected to tell them and just decided to accept the award on their behalf. Well, that's Chinatown, Jake. Anyhow, looking through the rest of this here, some of the pinups that you're going to find in Tinseltown Losing the Light have previously been published in the miniseries, and that would include pinups by artists Andrew Pepboy, Don Schmidt, and Henry Ponciano. Some of the new pinups, there's going to be one by artist David Moreno, Rafael Navarro, and a couple more to be determined. So here are some of my favorite pages from Tinseltown Losing the Light. As you can see here, they're filming. Now, obviously, sound wasn't a factor. So oftentimes when they were trying to set the mood of filming a silent movie, they would actually have an on-set violinist or even a small quartet that was playing live music to sort of help the actors get into the mood. So that's just one of the little details here that we've added as a touch of realism. And here you can see the character there on the right is Billy that I talked about, former pin boy. And there's a newspaper boy talking about the war in Europe. Now, one of the things that happens at Utopia Studios is one of their biggest stars gets involved in a big sex scandal, which means that there are now protesters on the lot and people calling for her films to be banned, which comes at a particularly inopportune time for Utopia Studios because they have just finished making a big, expensive costume drama with her that they were hoping was going to do very well for the studio. So due to that and a bunch of mysterious accidents happening on the lot, suddenly Utopia Studios' situation financially is kind of dire. Well, along comes a German director who says he's got the solution to all of Utopia's problems. He's going to film a movie down in Mexico. He doesn't really need very much money. He just needs some trucks, and it's going to put Utopia Studios back on the map. Well, Abigail Moore's boss, Miss Redwood, says when something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. So she sends Abby down to the Mexico shoot to babysit everything and just kind of make sure that things are on the up and up. Spoiler alert, in Hollywood, nothing is what it seems, and all hell will break loose before the end of our story, and Officer Abigail Moore will emerge a changed woman from who she was before that experience. Here you can see what I was talking about, the protesters on the lot, the extras sitting around smoking with expressions on their face that say they're a little nervous that they might not be seeing those paychecks they were promised. There is a little romantic aspect to Tinseltown. There you can see Abigail Moore kissing Tennessee Dan O'Leary in the moonlight. One of the things I love about Henry Ponciano's art is that he can do realistic people and realistic expressions, but he can also do something that's very stylized and romantic, like that panel there. And sometimes I feel like he's channeling the ghost of Dave Stevens, who, as I said, was one of my favorite artists. And I consider myself very lucky to have found Henry, and I look forward to working with him for a long time to come. So here you can see, this is one of the action sequences of Tinseltown. Without giving away exactly what's happening, you can tell that there's a big explosion, and there is Officer Abigail Moore staggering to her feet. She, much like the Japanese saying, may fall down 7 times, but she stands up 8. And one of the things about Abigail Moore is I wanted to make sure that she wasn't what they call a quote-unquote Mary Sue. You know, she's not perfect. She doesn't suddenly know a bunch of martial arts and judo skills overnight that can allow her to take on a half dozen mobsters or anything like that. She makes mistakes. She's kind of figuring stuff out as she goes, but she's a good person. And ultimately, at the end of the day, she's someone you can count on and somebody you definitely want on your side. And here's some of the reviews. What some people said. These reviews are from the first series, but Rick Geary, who I'm a big fan of, he does these real life based murder books that are amazing. If you're not familiar with his work, he's definitely worth checking out. He says, very impressive. I enjoyed it immensely. This says, Tinseltown is a smart, engaging, and exciting book full of rich characters. My buddy Michael Tanner, writer of Junior Braves of the Apocalypse from Only Press, said that. Here's a couple of reviews from critics. One of the most memorable and fantastic comics that I've read in a long time. 9.8, Tinseltown is a must read. Oliver Vestal said that. So here you can see this is a picture in the middle of my mother, Officer Miriam Lucarelli, who was notoriously camera shy. I believe this may be the only picture that I have of her in her police uniform, despite her wearing it for 20 years. And I very vividly remember the day that this was taken. She was going off to work, and I said, wait, before you go, let me get a picture of you in your uniform. And she said, why? And I said, well, I don't think I have any. And she said, oh, okay. She allowed me to take one, and that was it. So I told you before that there were female officers on the lot at Universal Studios. This is a picture of Laura Oakley. She was the chief of police, and she was also an actress. And there was also an incident, historically speaking, where her home was broken into and robbed, which made headlines in the local papers that the Universal Studios chief of police was robbed. So the closest character in Tinseltown that is analogous to Laura Oakley is Miss Redwood. And without copying the history exactly, Miss Redwood does get robbed as well in Tinseltown Losing the Light. So let's see. Hang on one second, guys. I just got a note. I'm not sure what you're saying. Let's see. Click 3 dots to add me as a moderator. Okay.
No, the right one.
Select odd moderator. Don't see your username, baby. I don't know. Let's see. Okay, so the lettering in Tinseltown, I just want to talk about, is done by Wes Loker. Now, Wes has his own book that comes out through Alterna. He's a creator, and he does an amazing job doing the lettering. The lettering on the first Tinseltown book was done by HDE. He's also a wonderful letterer. I would recommend, if anybody out there is doing a comic and looking for a letterer, hey, both of those guys do an excellent job and have my full endorsement. So one of the things I noticed is that we have a lot of new backers that are just getting Tinseltown Losing the Light. And what I would say to those guys is, that's fine. Tinseltown Losing the Light is a completely self-contained story. But also, if you want the complete Tinseltown, you should also think about either getting the digital or actual edition of the director's cut of Volume 1. And that is, like I said, Abigail's origin story. I want to take a quick look at some of the other add-ons that you can get. One of them is the Tinseltown t-shirts. As you can see, the one on the left is a variation on the cover, and the one on the right is an actually brand new, hot off the presses drawing by Henry Ponciano. Tinseltown losing the light. That's sort of the light and the dark of losing the light, if you will. Then there's the Tinseltown pin set. 3 pins. There's Officer Abigail Moore. There's the Tinseltown logo. And then there is the Tinseltown badge, 226. That was also my mother's badge. So, little inside thing there. There's the Tinseltown print set. Now, the print that is there in the middle is by artist Ryan Wynn. And the print on the far left that you see, that's actually a Judge Dredd mashup, as you can see, sort of 21-150 AD. The Tinseltown on the right, that is the back cover of the first volume. And then we have a couple smaller prints down there. That's the cover of Tinseltown 5, Tinseltown 4. And this thing that you see on the right is a Tinseltown trading card. And that's actually an oversized version of that card. So it's more like about 5 by 7, I think. And one of the things that you can get also, the single issues, that does include Pinboy, and it also includes a blank sketch cover of the first issue of the first miniseries. We already talked about that. In addition to writing comics, I also write some prose as a horror writer. So I put together this package for the Monster Kids. It includes Winter Horror Days, which is a collection of short stories that I edited of winter holiday-themed horror short stories. And that book was actually the #1 horror anthology on Amazon for a hot New York minute when it came out a number of years ago. I've got a story in there called Black Coal. I've got a kind of silly story called Where's Waldo in Fractured Scary Tales. If you're not familiar with Fractured Scary Tales, they're kind of like the Warren publications, I would say, from the 70s, but a modern version of that. So lots of really fun puns and bad taste. Then there is Cthulhu, The Terrible Twos. That book is volume 2, and it's put out by Russell Nolte, Wannabe Press. Henry and I have a short comic story in there called The Old Gods Ain't What They Used to Be. And then finally, on the far left, you see Dreams of Decadence. There is a story that was my first published story, and that was in autumn of 2000, and that is called What We Did to Lugosi. Another reward level that you can choose is Crude. So Crude is a play that I wrote and directed last summer as part of the Hollywood Fringe Fest. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Fringe Fest in Hollywood, it's actually a worldwide phenomenon. The biggest one happens in Scotland, in Edinburgh. But in Hollywood, they put on hundreds of plays every year within the space of a month, the month of June. And it's really a wonderful opportunity to see a ton of great creativity and talent. Even though I'm not doing a show this year, I am very excited to see a bunch of people's plays. So anyhow, Crude is a completely unauthorized play about the baddest of the rock and roll bad boys. a band that rose up from the Hollywood gutters in the early 80s to become a global cultural phenomenon, and how for one brief shining moment it seemed everything was possible. I should add, this play has not been authorized or endorsed by Motley Crue or any of its members. We did 2 sold-out runs last year, and this is a filmed pay-per-view of the play that you can watch. Very proud of it, very proud of the acting talent that was involved in it. And yeah, if you like what I do in the comic book world, you might want to check that out. In the music world, before I did comics, I was in a band called Dame Fortune. If you're a fan of bands like Kiss, Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, things like that, we put out 3 albums and a DVD in the 2000s. And although we're not playing out regularly anymore, we occasionally still put out a song here or there. I put out a few new songs under the name during the pandemic. So if you choose to get the music bundle, not only will you get those 3 CDs and the DVD, but you'll also get a digital collection of all of that material, plus all the material that we have released since. Word about shipping. I'll just say shipping is free for all US backers, and then it will be calculated and charged separately through Pledge Manager about 2 weeks after the campaign closes. So here's a couple early bird perks. Unfortunately, they are long gone at this point, but you can kind of see this is a better look at the Abigail Moore trading card, both the A side and the B side. And then there is also a foil version of the card that the first 60 backers are getting. So risks and challenges, there's always the possibility of delays, especially when we have, we're still feeling the effects of the supply chain issues from the pandemic. But I will say this, I have successfully run and delivered all of my previous Kickstarters, all 4 of them, and I see no reason why I shouldn't be able to successfully do the same with this one. I've purposely made the shipping a little bit later than I think it will be. I hope to actually deliver all of this stuff significantly before then, but I wanted to give myself a little bit of leeway just in case the unforeseen silent bullet delays things and makes it take a little bit longer than we anticipated. So that's pretty much all I want to say about Tinseltown. Thank you for joining me. I want to, I'll stop sharing right now. And we are live until 8 a.m. Pacific time, June 1st. If you have backed the campaign, thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. The overwhelming support that this project has received means the world to me, and I am sincerely blown away by how well this project has done. And if you're thinking about backing it, you should probably do it sooner than later, because we're, as they say in the Avengers, we're in the end game now. So anyhow, thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.